Hey everyone, in this video, Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris grapple over whether metaphysics are required to give moral principles their strength. This was a fascinating part 3 to my 3-part series on this part of this conversation between the two men. So, if you haven't seen those first 2 parts, first of all, how dare you? And second of all, go check them out right now. I'm waiting. It should be in one of these corners. Okay, if you're back, I won't hold you up any longer. Enjoy it.
Well, the first thing I would say about that is, to me, that's a recapitulation of the Judeo-Christian ethic, which is that you should be guided by love and use logos to serve that.
So, I made a comment in part 2 saying something like this. I said it was a Petersonian point. I had forgotten that he had actually made that exact point. Again, I have seen all of these conversations in their entirety, but it was years ago. So look at that. I guess he's really influencing my thought here. I'm sure many people will take advantage of this fact to call me a disciple or something. But he has a point, but it's not as big as a point as people might want it to be, even people on my side. So he's saying that's like, hey, look at that, Sam. Your prescription for morality is also what a lot of the religious prescription for morality. Look at that similarity. Isn't that interesting? And that's kind of the extent of the point. Because if you go any further, if you say that the only way you can hold the point is because of religion, then that's wrong. If you go any further, then kind of that is like, hey, look at that similarity. Almost like that underlying truth is really, really true. If you go anything beyond that, it kind of turns into a weaker argument. The only thing I would say is that while you might be able to figure out what truth is in terms of the material world through science and rationality, the idea that you're going to be able to define love or create a shareable definition of love with rationality alone is probably not going to happen. Right now, we disagree over whether it's more loving to give certain surgeries and treatments to children or not to. Some people would call that very loving. Others would say it's child abuse. So, stuff like that. The definition of love is not obvious, and reasonable minds can disagree, although that example might not be a very good one of reasonable minds. But reasonable minds can disagree about what love is. So there's that.
You got to read the fine print on reason.
No, well, I didn't say reason. I said logos, because that's something that's deeper than reason.
There's the Jesus smuggling.
Yes, exactly. Well, yes, definitely. Okay, so, but so look, I've been trying to. Part of the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing is to try to address.
I like how friendly these conversations are. We need more friendly conversations about important things. Everything always feels so, raw. I am slightly guilty of this. My thumbnails maybe sometimes use the word educate or destroys because the algorithm wants what the algorithm wants, and I'm not really going to hide that fact. But in terms of how I speak about things, I try to avoid that kind of rawness whenever I can. So this is a good example of that. It's an example we should try to follow.
Address the void, let's say, and I suspect that many of you are actually here because you would like to have the void addressed. And so the way it looks to me is something like this, and this is what I've derived in part from my studies of religious tradition. So I could say that at the beginning of Genesis, for example, there's a proposition that it's truthful speech that generates habitable order from chaotic potential. That seems to me to be the fundamental narrative, and I do believe there's something dead accurate and real about that, because we do generate the world as a consequence of our communicative effort. And then there's a second proposition.
When he says generate the world, by the way, he doesn't mean the material world necessarily. He means the world that human beings can understand and name and operate in, which for all practical purposes is the world, but it's not the world in a scientific sense. So again, Peterson believes in a more metaphorical kind of religion. People really don't like that sometimes, but just to clarify what he means there.
Which is that the world that we generate from the chaos of potential is habitable to the degree that the communication that we engage in is truthful. And that's why God, who uses the Logos at the beginning of time to generate the world, is able to say that his creation is good. The proposition is the world you bring into being through truthful speech is good. And that's the image of God that's implanted in man and woman.
Again, these are very good things to assume, I think. I think the idea that true communication is what allows the world to be habitable is absolutely true. And I think we're discovering right now what the backside of that, which is when we're not engaging in truthful speech, the world kind of comes apart. I'm going to have a couple of videos coming out soon, a little bit different style. Shameless plug here for just 1 second, I'm sorry. About semantic overload, about stochastic terrorism, dog whistles, that sort of thing. Just kind of all this rhetorical muck that's kind of messing with our ability to communicate honestly with each other, and I think is one of the biggest contributors to our falling apart. So yeah, shameless plug there.
And there's a grandeur about that idea, and you think, well, you don't need the grandeur because it's just a fiction. It's like, just wait a second here. It's not just a fiction, unless you don't believe that in some manner you partake in the creation of the world and that you have an ultimate responsibility that might well be described as divine.
So I'm gonna throw a shot at Peterson here because a lot of you probably want me to. Is he does this thing a lot. He says in some manner or to some extent. He says it all the time, and the reason he says it is because that's what he actually means. But you have to understand when he says in some manner, usually he means non-literally. And people don't like that, and I get why they don't like that. Believe me, I empathize. But this is the thing he does where he kind of says in some manner, and I feel like it's a little bit too hand-wavy of the difference. He's making a point, but that point is very different from what somebody who's unfamiliar with him would think he means. So by making that clarification in a hand-wavy way, like to some extent, or in some manner, it's not dishonest. It's actually incredibly precise. However, it does make it hard for an outsider to really understand what he means. He's like, okay, in some manner, what manner precisely? Right? It begs the question a little bit. I know what he means, and most of you probably know what he means, but I kind of wish, and I guess it's shorthand because he can't say it every single time, but still, it's a little bit, yeah.
Divine to participate in that process properly, truthfully, and with love. And there's every reason to think that that's an elevated ideal so high that it's worthy of conceptualizing as divine, and also to presume that it represents some fundamental metaphysical reality. And that's a lot more powerful than you need to be good.
Yes, but the problem here, Jordan.
Right, so that was a lot Peterson likes to do, his rants of words that do actually mean something if you pay attention, but that are slightly overwrought, let's say. And what he's basically saying is nesting the idea of it's important to be good in grandeur, as he says, believing it to be true about the way that the world works, not in a material way, but in a practical way. The type of faith that if you live by these principles, your life will work out better than if you do anything else, right? That's not a material proposition. That's kind of a metaphysical, a moral, a pragmatic proposition. And he's saying that if you believe that that is true, in the sense that you bet your life on it, if you believe this, if you cloak it with this type of grandeur, that actually adds something that's actually important. Because many people in the comment section have talked to me about how you could keep the principles, kind of strip away the religiosity, and it would work. And maybe that's true. I don't know. I'm still chewing on it. But I think that what Peterson is saying is that actually, when you strip that stuff away, you're stripping away quite a lot. And it's not evident that the underlying message has the same power or functionality without all of that stuff around it. And I think that point is true too. So this is one that I'm still working on.
Is that I could do exactly what you just did with Buddhism or Hinduism. And it is just as grand and just as deep and just as anchored to the first-person experience of contemplatives who've taken that as far as they could take it. You know, people,
well, then
monastics.
I would say, Sam, you should do that and see how people respond to it.
Well, no.
This actually isn't hurting Peterson's point, by the way. If Peterson's not advocating for the literal truth of Christianity right now, which I don't think he is, this doesn't hurt Peterson's point. It's actually enforcing it in some ways, because it's not really enforcing it. It's kind of neutral. It doesn't really do anything. Like, Harris agreeing that you could take another religious system and strip away the parts to show just the principles, or you could keep it in its grandeur and you could keep it in the belief of its metaphysical truth. It's like, okay, sure, of course you can. It's another religion. It's another set of moral principles. And, right? He's arguing against the point of Christianity literally being true, because you could do this with other religions. But again, Peterson isn't really arguing that right now, I don't believe. So this point doesn't land with me.
No, because
seriously.
Because I see the end of the game. It doesn't arrive where I want to get to, where we need to get to, because it's.
What is the real story of January 6th? Many people have asked that question.
It would be to different effect. There are different claims ultimately about the status of truth and good and evil, and about the beginning of the world and the fate of a human consciousness after death. They're completely irreconcilable worldviews.
I also don't think
cannot
that
square. If there are Hindus in the audience, they believe something that is totally irreconcilable to what Christians believe.
I don't think that you can offer, pardon me, a watered-down version of Buddhism as a consequence of psychedelic experience, as a acceptable and credible alternative to the power of the fundamental founding myths of the Western culture. And if you think you can, then you should try.
Okay, so now Peterson is arguing that Judeo-Christian values that are foundational to the West to a large extent are better than Buddhism, than modern Buddhism anyway. But he also says it's like, if you don't think that, then you should treat them appropriately and see. So, yeah, like, again, Harris isn't really arguing against what Peterson is saying here all that strong. And Peterson is just kind of, we'll just cut this part, I think. So, yeah, I mean, Peterson now is saying that Christianity, Judeo-Christian ideals as formed now are actually better than Buddhist ideals as they are now, maybe not as they were. But he's also saying it's like, hey, maybe the reason for that is because Buddhism isn't dressed up in the amount of grandeur and the amount of belief in metaphysical truth as Christianity is. Maybe it would be if we did those things. That kind of supports his point of that grandeur, of that belief in its metaphysical, metaphysical truth being there, being part of the principle's power. This kind of supports his point, right? Or that's his argument.
I'm trying. Well, I'm not trying that, but that's not.
Yeah, he's saying you're not trying to do that. But if you did dress up Buddhism in that kind of grandeur and that type of serious belief, maybe you'd have a system that has been as powerful as Judeo-Christian ethics have been, which is his idea there.
That's not what well, first of all, just to get my biography straight, it's not just the psychedelic experience.
I know.
Yes,
and I'm also not making light of the psychedelic experience.
Listen, to take this, we're having most of this conversation on the side of wherein it seems reasonable to worry about the fate of civilization, right? We could have started at a very different point with just the nature of consciousness, right? Our first person encounter with being itself. Right, all of us wake up each morning. We are thrust from a condition of deep sleep, which we seem to know nothing about, and we just got pushed through a veil of dreams into this apparently solid reality that we call the world, and we're engaging one another in this space of just consciousness and its contents, and we're trying to make sense of it. And science is the best language game we play, I would argue, in trying to make truly rigorous sense of it. But it doesn't exhaust all the language games we play. We play others that are also fact-based. We talk about what happened historically before we arrived here. We talk about facts as we can understand them that we just didn't witness, but others did, and we call that journalism, right? So we're trying to have a fact-based discussion.
We used to call that journalism.
Yes, it's getting harder and harder to discern what's actually going on now. But we are thrust into this condition of being our apparent selves moment by moment, and we notice the difference between happiness and suffering, right? And this is not merely sensory. It's not merely that, I don't like the feeling of a hot stove, and I do like a warm bath. It's ideas. The ways of thinking about ourselves and the world can open the door or close the door to various states of happiness and suffering. And religion leverages that. The difference between believing that your dead child is in heaven with Jesus and not being able to believe that is enormous.
I'm not sure what his point was there, to be honest with you. Maybe you guys will clown me in the comments for not understanding what was incredibly obvious to you, but it certainly wasn't obvious to me what his actual response there was. He seemed to kind of go off on his own thing. But that's part 3. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that reaction video. If you did, drop a like and please consider subscribing to see more. If you didn't, tell me why. I want to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I want to have these conversations. If you want to see the rest of my content or explore the broader Pangburn universe that I'm a part of, click one of the buttons that should be floating around my head right about now. And as always, I hope to see you all out there engaging in the war of ideas.